All right, so to get started, we're just gonna draw out a basic outline of a heart. And that can go right in the center of the page. And it can be any shape you want. You can have it longer, skinnier. There's no right or wrong way to draw a heart. Just your basic outline. And that's all you want to have right there. So keep it fairly light. I drew a little bit darker just so you could see it on camera, but you want to keep your heart fairly light. We're going to be using a mix of colors. I like to use an ice cube tray for my palette, but you can see here I have a pink, a purple, a blue, a teal. I want all those colors to show up in this piece. So pick your favorite colors and get them nice and wet so that we can get started. All right, so we're gonna start out by adding water to the piece. So with wet in wet technique, that's where you add water before adding the color. So I'm gonna fill in the entire heart with water, and you want it to be a thin layer, not so thin that it dries before you can get color down, but you also don't wanna have large pools of water on your page. So just make sure that as you work your way around, you're keeping the page fairly wet the entire time. So I kind of like to look at it from the side and see if I notice any large pools, and then I just move those around. So once you have it all covered in water, you can start by adding color. So I'm going to start with a purple over here. And my purple is very strong because it's been sitting in water all day. So the longer your color sort of, let's say the word smooshes in the water, the darker it's going to be. And that's okay. So you can move your page around to get it to bleed more. Mine bled right off, which is okay. Just dab that up. I like to keep paper towel handy so that I can always dab up anywhere that I don't want color. And then I just keep adding color down. So we're gonna have to keep the page wet the entire time we're working. So I'm gonna move from pink to a little bit of purple again, and then I'm gonna add some blue over here. So I have a fairly dark blue. You can use any shade of blue that you like, but I always try and keep colors together that work well together. So I find blue and purple work really well together. If they mix together, they don't create brown, which you don't want. So if I was to throw in a yellow right here, it would create a brown color, and we don't really want that. We're trying to keep the colors as bright as possible. So right now I'm just trying to lay down a few different colors so that I know where I want them to go and how I want to keep layering them on top. So that's basically where I want it to be for a first layer. And I can move the palette around a little bit to encourage the colors to bleed. So now that I've got that first layer down, I want to keep adding a little bit as it's drying. Sometimes you want to let it fully dry between layers, but with a piece like this, I kind of want to keep adding it as it's drying. Now we are going to have a point where we do just let it dry, but this isn't it yet. So I'm gonna add a little bit of this lime green in with my teal, just because it kind of creates a fun effect when they mix together. It creates this medium green that I really love. And I'll just keep going back to some of my colors, keeping the page wet. Keep adding the pink in the middle to darken it. If you find your colors aren't strong enough, just mix your brush around in the color with the water, and it should darken them. So now this is a good point where I'm quite happy with the darkness of it, but I want to add a few splatters in there just to have them blend together nicely in the water. If you add the splatters once it's already dry, they won't bleed at all, but if I add them now, they'll kind of bleed in. So I'll throw in some purple there, and I do it with one hand. I just tap the brush. And I'll throw in a little bit of blue here. So I'm trying to keep my splatters inside the heart shape for now. That's only because I'm gonna be adding a little bit of a background after. And that's where I'll get a little bit looser with some of the colors. So right now, I'm using a little bit more control and keeping it centered. All right, so we're gonna let this dry 100%, and then I'll come back and show you what to do on the second layer. Okay, so now that the first layer is 100% dry, we can go ahead and start on the second layer. Now for the second layer, you're going to be repeating the same thing you did with the first layer, but not quite as all-encompassing. So what I mean by that is that when I cover the whole thing with water, I'm actually leaving some parts with no water. And that way the first layer will show through. So I'm being a little almost sloppier when I add down the water. I'm just kind of dabbing the brush everywhere and leaving large sections empty. And this will create a very layered, textured effect. One of the fun perks of working with watercolor is seeing some of those textures show through, and it's important to work in layers. I seldom can create a painting that I can do all in one step. Usually I work on one piece over an entire day. That way it's always drying, adding more, coming back to it. So I'm just, as you can see, I'm just putting down the same colors that we had on the first layer, but just layering them again. And you'll see some areas where now you can see a contrast between this is where the second layer ends and the first layer is showing through underneath. So I'm just seeing where water is and dropping in color. And now this is a good time to go add more of those splatters. So I've added some of the old texture, some of the old color back on the second layer. Now I'm gonna add some splatters. And so where it's wet still, you're gonna see it just bled right in, and where it's dry, you're gonna see actual splatters. So I just kind of go to town here. Have fun, put lots of splatters down, keep them in the painting, meaning try not to get it outside of the heart. If you do, it's not a big deal. It's just because I'm adding a second layer or a third layer in the background, I wanna make sure that I'm sticking within the heart for now. But like I said, no big deal if you haven't got your splatters down right and you're a little bit outside, we can make that work for us. That's the beauty of loose watercolor. And see, I got some splatters out there, so I'm just gonna choose to dab them up. So any ones that I don't like, if there's some that are just a little strong, now's a good time to lift some of those up. And I'm actually gonna add a bit dark blue here. And just some right at the end of the heart. I want to define this bottom part a little bit more. It's quite wet, so I can move it around very easily. And you can see where I've left the first layer showing, because the water is only going to bleed, or sorry, the paint is only going to bleed where I've added water. So that's what you want to have for a second layer. So once again, I'm going to go back and let this dry, and then we'll come back in and add the background and the third and final layer to the heart. All right, so now that our second layer has dried, we can go in and add the background. And it's so important that you allow your second layer to dry fully so that it doesn't bleed into the background. So sometimes you can touch it or just look at it from side to side to make sure it's fully dry. For my background, I'm going to do a mix of yellow and teal. So similar to the way I did it on the heart, I'm just gonna go in and add some little blobs here in the background. And it'll be easier to see how big I made them once I start adding the color down. Then I'm gonna go in and add a little bit of teal for the background. And I love this teal that I bought. It's quite vivid. I use it in a lot of paintings. And I'm just telling the drips where to go for this piece. Usually what I'll do is I'll lift it up and just allow it to drip down, but this one I'm gonna tell it where to go. And that just means that I draw a little bit of a line to help it drip where I want it to. So I'm doing another one over here, and this one I'm gonna do in a bright yellow. This heart's fairly dark, so a nice bright yellow can help it pop. I'm not joining those two together. And then I'm gonna throw some more up here. Some more of that teal. And I'm coming right up to the heart with the water. And some of your purple may bleed out a little bit just because you're re-wetting it, but that's okay. It's fairly straightforward. Once you've added the water, you just drop some of your color in. And I'm gonna take my bigger brush and just do some splatters where I have that. Same with here, add some yellow splatters. And then add some more down here. And I'm being very liberal with the splatters, so I'm using quite a bit of water so that they really go all over the place. And I'm gonna add, to balance it out, I'm just gonna add a little bit of yellow in this corner. And I don't like to have any of these the same size. I want it to feel very uneven, unbalanced. So this one's quite small, these are a little bigger. Just having fun with it. Add a few more yellow splatters here. And I'll throw in some yellow in with the teal. So that's basically all I want to do for the background. Now I'm going to add a few more in here. Now if you haven't figured out how to aim yet with your splatters, you might want to wait for your background to dry fully. But if you have, you can just go in and add some here. Just adding a few in the heart just to add a bit more texture. And I like to alternate between clear water and actual paint. And that way the clear water causes some of these to bleed out a little bit more. So if I've added some with paint, then I go back over with clear water, and that makes them all different sizes. So I would call this piece done. If you're wanting to do this piece for a card, say a thank you card, you can go ahead and write thank you at the top. You can do it in all the proportions that you want. If it's for, say, a little girl's room, 8 by 10 is a nice size, but that's pretty much it. So I'm gonna allow this to dry, and then it's ready to be sprayed with an archival finish and framed up. I hope you enjoyed watching this with me. Please hit like if you enjoyed painting with me, and hit subscribe if you want to watch other videos just like this one. Have a great day.